Welcome to Things I Do for College. Today I am presenting my course project, Community Climate Change Appraisal. And mine is titled, Are We Driving Earth into the Ground or Are We Eating It to Death? I'm Liberty. Let's explain. Your introduction. Welcome. What is climate change and global warming? The forcing agents. History. Graphs. Regional environmental influence. Socioeconomic impact. Mitigation. Future outlook, summary, and sources. Climate change. Noun. A change in global or regional climate patterns, in particular a change apparent from the mid to late 20th century onwards and attributed largely to the increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. Global warming. Noun. A gradual increase in the overall temperature of the Earth's atmosphere, generally attributed to the greenhouse effect caused by increased levels of carbon dioxide, chlorofluorocarbons, and other pollutants. Chlorofluorocarbons. It's a neopleurodon, Charlie! What are forcing agents? Forcing agents are the things that occur naturally, volcanoes. Or not so much. People driving cars, mass production of cows. Forcing agents force two reactions from what is called feedback. So feedback's the overall, and then it forks into two reactions. You got negative, and you got positive. Despite how that sounds, you want a negative one. Think about it this way. When it comes to global warming and climate change, you want negative feedback, just like you want a negative COVID test. Okay? Okay. Forcing agents for climate. CO2 from vehicles? Yes. CO2, carbon dioxide, can act like a blanket, trapping heat in the atmosphere. It's kind of like being in a sauna, but you can't get out. CO2 lets sun in, but not out. CO2 levels are the highest they have been in the last 3 million years. Carbon dioxide comes from both natural sources including volcanoes, the breath of animals, and plant decay, and human sources, primarily the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas to generate energy. Methane from cows. Mostly cows. When methane is released into the atmosphere, it reacts in dangerous ways. For one thing, methane is predominantly removed from the atmosphere via oxidation, resulting in water vapor and carbon dioxide formation. As a result, methane directly contributes to global warming, but it also indirectly contributes to global warming through the release of carbon dioxide. Historical context. Well, we've never produced as many cows as we do today. Why? Because there's a higher demand for meat. There's more people, so of course there's a higher demand for meat. We transport them from farm to slaughter, so that takes CO2, and as they're living, it's producing methane. So as I said, we transport them from farm to slaughter, which causes CO2 and methane. And after slaughter, we transfer the meat all over, which still causes more CO2. And what used to be negative feedback is now a positive feedback, and it piggies back on the production of CO2 as well. Mind you, that's the methane. Carbon dioxide, we've had, 3 volcanic eruptions in the past forced an event known as the Little Ice Age. Huge effect, but they called it the Little Ice Age. Before we had cars, we had negative feedback. More cars, more people, more transportation, which turned it into positive feedback. Gross. CO2 then and now. Wee woo, wee woo, wee! It shot up like a horse out the gate from the Kentucky Derby. We're in danger. Atmospheric CO2 is now hitting 50% higher than pre-industrial revolution levels. Methane then and now. Annual emissions of greenhouse gas has risen by almost 10% in the past 2 decades, driven by agriculture and the gas industry. Evidence from the past? Sure, let's go over it. Remember the little ice age we were talking about that just decimated populations? Global warming was different across the globe. Warmer regions warmed, some cooled. There were droughts, overabundance of rain. It caused civilizations to collapse due to bad crops, colder temperatures, caused isolation. How can it cause isolation? They had migrated to specific areas which had caused the glaciers and the frost to grow, which forced them to stay in a remote area, which cut them off from other civilizations, and they died from mostly hunger and freezing to death. Then we had the medieval warm period. There were pleasant times, but there were also periods of extended drought. What happens when you have extended drought? You die of thirst, you can't grow crops, so again, you die of hunger. It was seemingly prosperous. Global warming proponents say that a return to a medieval warm period like conditions would not be beneficial to all, as higher temperatures would make certain locations more pleasant and others prosperous, while diminishing agriculture yield in others. We're already in a food crisis, but we'll get to that later. Here in Maryland, we all know what Aberdeen Proving Grounds are, or APG. Since 1920 to 1980, it's about 11.6, 11.7, and the temperature's slowly rising to a cool 12 Celsius average. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. Okay, well, let's look at 1880 to now, because that's what I found from our friends at NASA. Thanks, guys. It's about 11.3, and it shot up to almost 12.3. Those aren't fun. Cumberland's not that far from here, guys. Come on. Remember we talked about food shortage? 1 in 4 black children, 1 in 5 Hispanic children, 1 in 9 white children, meaning more than 1 in 7 children, live in food insecure households. Why is this important? Because global warming and climate change are a delicate, intricate web. Supermarkets throw away 288,966 tons of food, and that food turns into methane. So we could mitigate that by donating it to local shelters. Just go to your supermarket and see how they are trying to mitigate their methane or their carbon footprint, which you can do by yourself, but we'll get to that later. Regional environmental influence, carbon dioxide. Mind you, we haven't drilled for oil in Maryland since 95, and there's 3 oil rigs that are inactive, but that doesn't mean that they're not across the states. Landfill and waste. Methane piggybacks into carbon dioxide, decomposition, microbes. Biomass and biofuel burning. Cattle examples, burping, flatulence. Farming, all of these have an effect. I did read that we could feed our animals 3-NOP, which stands for nitrooxypropanol. Nitrooxypropanol. 3-nitrooxypropanol, which mitigates enteric methane with a minimal impact on the feed print. So that's really neat. We could ask local farmers to look in that. Getting a little bit ahead of myself, but here we go. Socioeconomic impact. Well, carbon dioxide mixes pretty evenly with the atmosphere, so it's hard for us to separate it. Older research shows domes of high CO2 over dense cities can worsen the effects of localized air pollutants. Do you know how many people have visited other places and they're like, oh my god, it stinks! Or it's so hard to breathe. It's because of the CO2 domes. Causes respiratory disease and issues. Local CO2 emissions can increase premature mortality unless you live in the country, which good for you. Methane. Landfills, oil, natural gas systems, agriculture activities, coal mining, stationary, and mobile combustion, wastewater treatment, and uncertain industrial processes. Those responsible for the emissions may not be familiar with the technologies available for methane recovery or potential for profitable recovery projects. Methane is a short-lived climate pollutant that the EPA estimates comprised 8.7% of United States greenhouse emissions in 2012. Again, methane turns into CO2. It's very important. This affects jobs and tourism. How? How does it affect it? Have you ever heard a tourist say they want to go somewhere dirty? People complain all the time that New York is dirty, that New Orleans is dirty, that I believe it's New Delhi, India is dirty, and they don't want to go. And how does that affect our jobs? Well, if we have a dirty bay, we can't harvest our crabs because our crabs are literally choking on garbage. Treasure of the Chesapeake is our bay. Get it together, Maryland. Clean it up. Possible mitigation geoengineering actions. Well, we can buy meat from local butchers. Don't eat meat at least once a week. Meatless Monday. Feeding cows 3-NOP. There it is again. Ask your supermarket to donate foods to homeless shelter or food banks. Some methane geoengineering is not a money feasible option, which I understand. So we all need to work together. How can we mitigate carbon dioxide? Carpool, walk more often, plant more trees and flowers, go solar. It's initially expensive, but it will pay back. Improve mass transit. Carbon dioxide removal. What is carbon dioxide removal? Also known as CDR. Carbon dioxide removal, large-scale carbon dioxide removal, also known as CDR, or negative emissions, or carbon drawdown, aims to address the primary human source of climate change by removing carbon dioxide permanently from the atmosphere to be stored underground or under the ocean floor. If deployed at a planetary scale, CDR could help prevent ocean acidification and slow the rate of global warming. CDR is not a substitute for rapidly reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is essential under any scenario. And it's absolutely amazing that we have carbon dioxide removal in effect, or we have an idea, but all of these issues are what come about. Putting ground up rocks on the land and into the sea could increase CO2 uptake. But what are the environmental impacts of massive mineral extraction? These are all questions, and we don't know what's going to happen. What we do know is if we continue down the route we're going, which is doing nothing, we're jacked. And not in a good way. So, future outlook for the area: less carbon emissions and more trees means we can have a healthier quality of life, and it beautifies the area if we have more trees. Going solar puts money in your pocket, and Maryland will actually pay you to have solar. You just need to see if you qualify. Less methane is less CO2. Less food waste hopefully helps communities, and less methane, guys. Come on. Overall, we can overcome this. We can't reverse all the damage. Buy local, carpool, walk more, no meat once a week. And we're running short on time here. Sources and sources and sources. Just look into it and have a great day.